I moved into apartment 70C for a fresh start, but the walls remember what I forgot drama story. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand that I didn't move into this building looking for trouble. I was looking for silence, for anonymity, maybe even forgiveness. The kind of peace you can only find in old walls with new locks, where nobody knows your name and everyone minds their own business. Apartment 70C was cheap. Too cheap. The landlord didn't ask for references, barely glanced at my ID, and handed me the keys like he wanted to be rid of them. That should have been my first warning. The second was the smell in the hallway. Something metallic, faint, but clinging, like rust, or maybe old blood. I tried to ignore it. I wanted to start over. I told myself it was just the pipes, but nothing in this building was just anything. Not the woman across from me with eyes too wide and hands that trembled even when she smiled. Not the noise that crept through the walls every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., a kind of low whispering buzz that made my molars ache, and certainly not what I found taped behind the bathroom mirror 3 days after moving in. A photo. Just one. A girl I'd never seen before standing in my new living room, looking over her shoulder, eyes filled with something too deep for a picture to capture. Written on the back in shaky ballpoint. If you see her, do not speak. She doesn't forget. The air in 70C never warmed. Even on days when the sun blistered the windows, I'd find myself pulling on a hoodie. My breath sometimes misted. The floorboards groaned beneath me like they carried the weight of more than just my steps. And I started hearing things. Not just the hum at 3:33, but soft footsteps when I knew I was alone. Water running when the tap was off. My name whispered. Not yelled, not spoken. Just breathed, like a prayer or a warning. The neighbors were no help. Most kept their doors shut, heads down. The woman from 7D, her name was Clara, once caught my eye in the stairwell. She looked at me like I was already marked. You moved into her apartment, she muttered, almost to herself. Then she said nothing more. I didn't know who her was. I hadn't asked. I should have. Instead, I searched online for anything about the building. It wasn't famous for murders, not known for tragedy, not even listed on the haunted forums. But that only made things worse. Because sometimes, the places that scream loudest do so in silence. I kept the photo hidden. Something told me it didn't want to be found again. I shoved it behind a loose tile in the kitchen wall and started sleeping with the light on. One night, I dreamed of the girl. She was standing by the window in my living room, exactly like in the photo, but this time she turned around. Her mouth moved, but the sound was like static and cracking ice. I woke up cold, sweating. Sheets twisted around me like they were trying to keep me still. The window was open. I never left it open. On the sill, a single wet footprint faced inward. Not out. Something had come in. I stopped going to work. I stopped eating. My eyes hollowed. My fingers trembled. My boss stopped calling. I think she knew. I started staying awake all night, watching the mirror in the hallway, because that's where she appeared the most. The mirror didn't always reflect me. Sometimes it reflected the apartment as it had been before I arrived. Different furniture, different paint, the girl pacing in the background, moving faster than she should have been able to. And just once showed her standing directly behind me, even though I was alone. When I spun, nothing. But the mirror cracked. It was Clara who finally told me her name. We met again in the laundry room, where the ceiling flickered and the machines whined like they were afraid. Her name was Rachel, she whispered. She lived there before you. Nobody knows what happened. She just stopped being seen. Rent kept getting paid. Lights came on, but no one saw her. And then she didn't exist anymore. But she's still there, waiting. I didn't believe in ghosts. I still don't. What I do believe in are memories that rot when they're forgotten, wounds that reopen in silence, and buildings that remember. I decided to leave. I packed that night, trembling hands folding shirts and stuffing them into garbage bags. But the door wouldn't open. Not jammed. Not stuck, locked, from the outside. I called the landlord. No answer. I banged on the door, yelled through the walls, but no one came. That night, she came closer. The next morning, the hallway was empty, silent. But when I looked through the peephole, the girl from the photo stared back, her eye perfectly aligned with mine. The glass fogged up. I fell back, heart jackhammering. The mirror in the hallway shattered with a bang like a gunshot. I started screaming, not out of fear, out of helplessness. I was trapped, and I wasn't alone anymore. The nights blurred. I stopped counting days. I couldn't tell dream from memory. The girl never spoke, not with words. But she made me feel things. Regret, shame. A deep, nose-eating guilt that didn't belong to me. Or maybe did. One night, I found a notebook beneath the floorboard near the bed. Rachel's diary. Her last entry read, "He said he'd never leave me. Now I'm all that's left. I keep him here. I make sure he remembers. I make sure they all do. I didn't know who was. I didn't want to know. Because part of me feared it was me, that I'd been here before, that I'd done something I'd buried so deep even I couldn't recall it, and that Rachel wasn't a ghost, she was justice. And justice doesn't knock, it stays." On the 13th day, at least, I think it was 13, I woke up to silence. Real silence. The kind that presses on your ears. The door was open. Just ajar. I could leave. But there, in the hallway, were dozens of photos. Polaroids scattered like breadcrumbs. All of me. Me sleeping. Me crying. Me screaming into the mirror. And in every single one, Rachel stood behind me, growing clearer. More solid. More alive. I stepped over them. Out. Never looked back. But here's the thing. Even now, as I tell you this, I can feel her. Not in the room. In the reflection. The mirror to my left just twitched. Just slightly. And sometimes, when I'm about to drift to sleep, I hear a whisper under the hum of the fridge. Not my name. Just one word. Remember. The moment I stepped out of 70C, the air shifted. It was as if I'd broken the seal on something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. The hallway was empty. Too empty. Not just of people, but of life. No flickering overhead bulbs, no hum from behind doors, no muffled televisions or barking dogs. The stillness rang in my ears. My legs were trembling, but I forced myself forward, gripping the railing like it was the only real thing left. I didn't take the elevator. I couldn't. Not after the sound I'd heard the night before. The whimpering that echoed up the shaft like someone was trapped inside, scratching to get out. I took the stairs, every step feeling like it might collapse under me. When I finally reached the ground floor, the lobby was lit, humming fluorescently, almost blinding. The smell of old bleach and rust made my stomach churn. The front doors stood wide open. I ran. Outside, the world continued like nothing had happened. Cars moved, people walked, clouds drifted. It felt obscene. I wandered the streets for hours, unsure where I was going, hoping that walking far enough would wear away the residue of her. I went to a diner on the edge of town, one I'd never been to. I sat in the corner booth with my back to the windows and tried to eat. But every time I glanced at the reflective napkin holder, her eyes stared back. Not malicious, not angry. Just waiting, watching. I left my food untouched. I couldn't go back to 70C, that was obvious, but I couldn't stay away either. A part of me, some warped, infected corner of my mind, felt tethered. That apartment had done something to me. Or maybe I had always been that way, and the apartment had just peeled back the skin. I checked into a cheap motel by the highway, paid in cash, no ID. That night, I covered every reflective surface. The TV, the mirror, even the chrome faucet. But still, just before sleep, I saw her. Not with my eyes, but inside my head. A flash of her pacing, her hands bloodied, her mouth moving but producing no sound. And something else, a man's voice, low and desperate, whispering her name again and again like an apology or a curse. The next day, I bought a burner phone and called Clara. I wasn't sure why. I think I wanted answers, maybe closure. Maybe just to hear someone else say she saw it too. She answered on the second ring, her voice strained, brittle. "You got out," she said. "That's rare." I asked her what had happened to Rachel, what she knew. "She wasn't alone," Clara said. "That's the part they never talk about. There was a man, lived with her for months. No one ever met him. We just heard things. Fights, screaming, crying, then nothing. Rachel disappeared and so did he. Like they were swallowed. I asked if anyone had ever investigated, if the police had been involved. She laughed hollow. This building eats questions. You're lucky you still want answers. Most people who see her, they stop asking. I hung up before she could say more. I didn't want to hear the rest. I didn't want to hear what she'd say next, that maybe I wasn't the first one to feel this way. That maybe others had left and still never really escaped. I walked until my legs ashed. I sat in parks, watched strangers, searched their eyes for the same hollowness. I started to notice patterns, people flinching at nothing, avoiding mirrors, crossing the street when they passed me. Something was leaking out of me like smoke from a sealed jar. And at night, I began hearing a new sound, a faint knocking, not at the door, at the window, even on the third floor of a locked motel room. By the fourth night, I stopped sleeping. Coffee became my bloodstream. I started drawing her not consciously. I'd find napkins filled with sketches of her face, her silhouette in the corner of rooms, her hands pressed against invisible glass. I started carrying her photo with me again, the one I'd found behind the mirror. I kept it in my wallet like an ID. It felt like she wanted to be remembered, needed it. Then I met the man in the library. He was older, hunched, wore a green coat even though it was summer. He sat across from me without asking, placed a thin file on the table. "You were in 70C, he said. I froze. My hands went cold. "You're not the first," he continued. "And you won't be the last, but you might be the first who could end it." He opened the file. Inside were photos, newspaper clippings, maps. One of the clippings showed a girl's face, not Rachel's, but similar, same haunted eyes. "This was in 92, he said. "Her name was Am Building. Same room." Another clipping. A boy. Different decade. Different story. Same apartment. "It's like a wound that won't scab," he whispered. "Something happened in 70C long ago. Something that keeps repeating." He handed me a map, a blueprint, floor plans for the building. "There's a space behind the bathroom wall, not on the plans. A crawl space, sealed from the inside. That's where it started." I asked how he knew. "Because I sealed it," he said. "And now it's open again." I went back. I shouldn't have, but I did. Some part of me already knew I would. The door to 70C was unlocked, hanging slightly open. The air was thick, sour. The apartment looked the same but different, soaked in shadows, corners deeper than they should have been. I stepped inside. My ears rang. The floor creaked in recognition. I moved to the bathroom. The mirror was whole again. No cracks, no dust. Like it had been reset. I peeled away the tiles I'd disturbed before. Behind them, the wall was soft, rotten. I dug. With my hands, with a kitchen knife clawing through plaster until my fingers bled. Behind it was the space. Small, black. I reached in, heart thudding. My fingers brushed something. Fabric. Cold metal. I pulled out a necklace, a rusted locket with a small, charred photo inside. The image was smeared, but I recognized the face. It was me. I staggered back, dropped the locket. It clatter-rolled, settled at the foot of the mirror. And that's when the reflection changed. She stood there behind me, no longer pacing. She reached for my shoulder, but I didn't turn. I couldn't. The air was syrup, thick, my limbs leaden. Her hand passed through me, and suddenly I remembered. Not everything. Just fragments. A fight, her screaming. A fall. The sound of something cracking. My hands shaking. Blood. So much blood. And a voice in my head whispering. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I dropped to my knees, the weight of memory crushing. She didn't vanish. She didn't fade. She stepped in the room. Really stepped. No longer a reflection. No longer a ghost. Just Rachel, or what was left of her. Her eyes weren't accusing. They were pleading. She reached out, and this time I took her hand. In that moment, I thought I'd be consumed. That she'd drag me into whatever place she lived now. But instead, she smiled. Just once. And then she dissolved. Not into air, but into light. The apartment sighed like something old had been exhaled. The mirror cracked again, this time from within. I stood in silence. I didn't know if I had set her free or if she had set me free. I only knew one thing. 7C wasn't empty anymore. It was whole. Whatever had lingered, whatever had festered, had finally been acknowledged. The kind of truth that sears when it surfaces. I locked the door behind me. For the first time, it clicked closed without resistance. Down the hallway, Clara was watching. She said nothing. Just nodded once and went inside. That night, I slept. Mer whispers. No knocking. No Rachel. Just darkness and breath and silence. But in the morning, when I looked in the modal mirror, the locket was on the sink, and scratched into the glass above it. 6 words I hadn't heard before but instantly understood. She remembers you. So do we. I didn't take the locket with me. I left it sitting on the modal sink like a cursed souvenir, but it didn't stay there. Each place I ran to. New rooms, new cities, new names. It kept appearing, sometimes tucked neatly beneath my pillow. Sometimes inside my shoe. Once, impossibly, it was floating in a glass of water I hadn't poured. I smashed it once with a hammer, watched the glass shatter. The photo inside melt into a smear of black and silver. But the next day, it was whole again, lying on the nightstand as if it had never left. That was the moment I stopped running. Because you can't outrun something that's already inside you. Rachel had touched something deeper than memory. It was legacy, recursion, a loop echoing through time and concrete. And I wasn't just a witness, I was a participant. Maybe always had been. The man in the green coat had warned May. It repeats. And now, even miles away from 70C, I felt the walls closing in. Not real walls. Temporal ones, like my moments were folding back on themselves, repeating little motions without realizing. Pouring coffee 3 times in a row, waking at exactly 2:33 a.m., finding my own notes written in handwriting I couldn't remember forming. Notes that said things like, "Don't forget again." And, "You have to finish it this time." I thought it was madness. But madness doesn't bring back the dead. Whatever this was, it wanted closure. So I stopped resisting. I began collecting. Everything I remembered about 70C. Everything from the diary, the man's file, Clara's warnings. I started digging, not into walls but archives. Deeds, blueprints, death records, tenant registries. The building itself had been renamed 3 times, each time after a scandal. A suicide, a disappearance, a fire. But the room, always the same 7C, like a fixed point, immune to change. A scare the city tried to cover but never healed. I went to City Hall under a fake name, bribed a janitor to get access to old zoning maps. There it was, the original floor plan. And behind 70C's bathroom, before it was walled off, there had been another room, a narrow servant's passage that led nowhere, and in red ink, scribbled on the margin of one copy, was a nota. Do not enter, do not restore. Someone had tried to erase it, but the words bled through. That night, I stayed in a hostel where the walls were paper, thin, and the lights always flickered. I laid out every clue, every photo, every drawing I'd ever made of Rachel, and then I found something I hadn't noticed before. In each sketch, no matter the angle, the expression, the light, there was a figure behind her. Faint, shadowed, male. Watching, sometimes just an outline, sometimes a hand on her shoulder, always there. And the worst part, he looked like me. I stared at those drawings until my eyes burned. It couldn't be coincidence. It couldn't be imagination. Rachel hadn't just been haunting me. She'd been showing me, repeating the moment over and over until I finally looked at it. Not just at her, at him. At what he'd done. What I'd done. I booked a return bus to the city. One way. I didn't plan to leave again. Not until I understood everything. When I arrived, the building was still standing unchanged, as if the months had never passed. As if time had paused and waited for me to return. The lobby smelled the same. Faint bleach and iron. The elevator still whined and shivered. I took the stairs again, heart hammering louder with each step. At the 7th floor, the air changed. Heavier. Like stepping into a pressure chamber. 7C's door was locked. This time I knocked. Once. Twice. Then I waited, and after a minute it opened on its own. Inside, the apartment was pristine. No broken mirror. No cold drafts. Furniture I didn't remember. A velvet armchair. A small writing desk. Heavy curtains that hadn't been there before. But it wasn't the apartment I noticed first. It was Rachel. She was sitting in the armchair, head tilted slightly, eyes calm. She looked alive, not just corporeal, human. Breathing. Her fingers rested on the locket, which sat open in her lap. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. She raised her hand slowly and pointed toward the bathroom. I followed. The mirror was whole again. But this time, when I stared into it, I didn't see myself. I saw the room as it had been years ago. Rachel crying. Screaming. A man shouting. A struggle. Her hitting the floor. Him panicking. Covering it up. Plastering the walls. Calling no one. Leaving her there. And when the man turned his face to the mirror, I saw it clearly. It was me, but not me now. Me from a life I couldn't recall, a version of myself buried so deep I'd forgotten he ever existed. I staggered back, the vision faded, my reflection returned, pale and wide-eyed. The tiles beneath me cracked. The air throbbed. I understood, finally. The building wasn't cursed. I was. I stumbled out of the bathroom, collapsing onto the floor. Rachel still sat in the chair, unmoving, but her eyes had changed, not hate, not forgiveness, something older, infinite. She knew. She had always known. And now I did too. I began to remember flashes from that life. A name Jonathan, not the name I'd been using. An apartment just like this one, but older. Her smile, her laugh. My jealousy, my rage. The night it went too far. The night I buried the past, literally, behind the walls. And then I changed cities, changed names, built a new life on a foundation of silence. Until somehow I end up back here, in 7C. It wasn't chance, it was recursion. I hadn't chosen this apartment. It had chosen me. To make me remember, to make me answer. I looked at Rachel again. She stood now, the locket in her hand. She crossed the room slowly, placed it around my neck. It felt warm. Too warm. Like a brand. She whispered one word, her first and only word. No. And everything fell away. I woke in the crawl space behind the bathroom wall. Cramped. Cold. Surrounded by rot. I couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Just breathe. Barely. In the flickering light of a single bare bulb, I saw dozens of names scratched into the wood. Names like mine. Names I didn't recognize, all ending in the same date. Today's. The realization hit hard. I wasn't free. I was part of the cycle. Rachel hadn't released me. She'd given me a role. Not as the haunted, but the haunter. Not as the witness, but the echo. I was now the thing behind the wall. And someone else, someday, would open it again. Would find the locket. Would see me standing behind them in the mirror. And they would remember. There is a silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the crushing stillness of being unobserved, unseen, erased. That was what I woke into, or more accurately, fell into, because waking implies a return to light, and this was only darkness. Behind the bathroom wall, in the crawl space sealed like a grave, time didn't pass in hours or days. It curled around itself like smoke. There were no clocks, no sun, no noise but my own heart thrumming with a fear that no longer had a name. I tried to scream, but the air was thick. It filled my lungs with the taste of mildew, plaster, and something older. Something that might have once been blood. My limbs were heavy, my body twisted against the confines of the narrow space, and I understood then that I wasn't the first to lie here. And I wouldn't be the last. The wooden beams around me were carved with names, scratched deep by fingers or nails or rusted metal. Some I recognized from the file the man in the green coat had shown me. Anna, Mark, Helen. But most were unfamiliar. Just ghosts of people who, like me, had lived in 70C, had thought they could leave it behind, only to find themselves sealed into its bones. One name repeated over and over: R. Owens. Sometimes neat, sometimes frantic, sometimes so deeply gouged into the wood that splinters had formed around the letters. I didn't know who he was, but I would. I stopped fighting after the first few hours, or days. The panic came in waves, and when it receded, it left behind a strange clarity. I began to explore the space with my fingers. The dark trained them to see. I discovered fragments of life buried here: buttons, coins, scraps of fabric, a child's beret, a dried flower pressed flat against the beam like a fossil. All trophies, all offerings, or maybe remnants of others who had been kept here until they forgot their names. At some point, I heard footsteps in the bathroom above me. Muffled, slow. Then the creak of the floorboards as someone leaned against the wall. A whisper followed, faint but unmistakable. My name, not screamed, not even spoken with urgency, just exhaled like a breath through the drywall. I froze. It came again. Jonathan. Not the name I'd used in my new life. The name from before, the one I'd buried. My name, her voice. Rachel hadn't left. She was still here, watching, waiting. And she was changing. I began to see light, not from the outside world, but from the inside of my skull. Dreams, maybe. Hallucinations. Visions stitched together from memories and fears. Rachel dancing in an empty room, spinning slowly, her eyes locked on mine. Rachel curled up in the crawl space beside me, breathing without lungs. Rachel opening her mouth to scream, but producing only static, over and over. A loop, one day. If days existed anymore, I woke to find something had been placed beside me. The locket. Again. No chain. Just the cold oval resting against my chest. I reached for it, my fingers trembling, and opened it. But the photo had changed. It wasn't Rachel anymore, it was me, smiling. Behind me in the picture, Rachel stood, one hand on my shoulder, her eyes utterly empty. I dropped it. The wood around me groaned. And then, impossibly, the wall opened. Light flooded in. Not sunlight. Not artificial glow. Something pale and gray and flat, like the color of memory. I crawled toward it without thinking. My limbs screamed in protest. My skin tore on nails and splinters, but I didn't care. I had to see. Had to know. When I pulled myself through the opening, I was back in the apartment, 7C. But different. It was empty. Truly empty. The furniture was gone. The curtains stripped, the walls bare, peeling. The air smelled of dust and rot. And yet everything was familiar. Exactly as I had seen it in my dreams. This wasn't the present. This wasn't even the past. This was the echo. I moved through the space slowly, afraid the floor would collapse beneath me. My hands touched surfaces that didn't feel solid, like walking through a memory on the verge of vanishing. The mirror in the hallway was whole again. I approached it, expecting to see her. But what I saw froze me completely. It was me, but not as I was, as I had been, standing in the room, brushing my hair, turning slowly, smiling. The reflection didn't match my movement. It moved on its own. It was alive. Separate. It saw me. It walked toward the glass from the inside. And then it pressed its hand to the surface. I ran. Not out of fear, out of instinct. But the apartment had changed. The hallway now led to a stairwell that twisted downward endlessly. Each step I took seemed to loop. The wallpaper peeled, reformed, peeled again. I passed doors that weren't numbered. Some were open, some oozed darkness. In one, I saw a man hanging from the ceiling fan, spinning silently, his eyes open and glowing faintly red. In another, a woman sat cross-legged in the center of a room, plucking the strings of a harp made from bones. None of them looked at me. None of them stopped me. They just watched, and I realized I wasn't running through the building anymore. I was running through the collective memory of it, through every moment ever suffered within its walls. A hallway of trauma, a spiral staircase of guilt, and I was just one more thread in the tapestry. Eventually the stairs ended. I found myself in a room that didn't exist in any blueprint. Circular, endless. Its walls were made of mirrors, each one showing a different version of me. In one, I was a child. In another, I was bleeding from the eyes. In a third, I was kissing Rachel, and in the center of the room stood a chair. Rachel sat in it. But she was different now, older, not in age, but in presence. She had become something beyond human. Her eyes reflected every mirror. Her voice echoed before she even spoke. "You remember now," she said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. I had no choice. She stood, and the mirrors began to ripple, each reflection stepping out from its surface. Dozens of me. Hundreds. All versions I could have been, had been, would be. All carrying the weight of what had happened in that room. All bound to the choice I had made years ago. The silence, the escape, the lie. "You thought forgetting would free you," she said. "It only made you hollow." "I didn't mean to," I whispered. "I didn't want." She raised a hand. Silence fell like a curtain. "It doesn't matter what you meant," she said. "It matters what you did, and what you didn't do." The locket floated between us, spinning slowly. I reached for it. She didn't stop me. As my fingers closed around it, the mirrors shattered. And I remembered everything. Not just the night she died, but every night after. The voices, the scratching, the endless sensation that someone was following me, hiding in my reflection. It hadn't been guilt. It had been Rachel, preserving the memory, ensuring it lived, because if no one remembered, it would happen again. The violence, the silence, the forgetting. "You have to carry it now," she said. "Carry what?" I asked. She pointed to my chest. The locket was gone. Its chain now wrapped around my heart. "You," she said, "carry the memory." And then I woke up, in bed, in 70C. Morning sunlight poured through the window, birds chirped. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Clara. "Hey!" Her voice said, "Just checking in. Wanted to welcome you to the building. I saw you move in yesterday. If you need anything, I'm in 70D. The message ended. I sat up slowly, looked at the mirror, and saw Rachel behind me, smiling, just as I remembered. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't even flinch. Because by the time I saw Rachel behind me in the mirror that morning, smiling like nothing had ever happened, it no longer felt like a horror. It felt like gravity. Like the inevitable pull of something old and hungry. Something patient. The apartment was pristine. Walls freshly painted. The scent of plaster still hung in the air. A small welcome note from the landlord sat on the kitchen counter, along with a bottle of cheap red wine wrapped in a bow. The date on the calendar read Monday, May 13th. The same date etched into the crawlspace wall, the one repeated again and again in the beam like a mantra. I touched my chest where the locket had vanished hours, or years, before. There was nothing there, but I could still feel its weight, not physical, but emotional. A kind of internal heaviness, like the memory had become a part of my bones. I moved through the apartment slowly, half expecting the floor to give way or the walls to breathe, but everything was calm. Ordinary, the sun danced on the hardwood. Outside, the city moved on in blissful ignorance, but inside me something fundamental had shifted. When I opened the fridge, it was fully stocked. Eggs, milk, fruit, a brand of yogurt I hadn't eaten in years. Not since before Rachel. That detail made my fingers tremble as I reached in. Someone knew. Someone had set the stage perfectly, like a replica of the life had before everything fell apart. I sat at the small kitchen table and tried to eat. The spoon rattled in the bowl. The cereal went soggy, and then I heard a knock at the door. Not forceful. 3 soft taps. I already knew who it would be. Clara stood there, smiling too wide. She wore a sundress and held a tin of cookies in trembling hands. "Welcome," she said, eyes darting over my shoulder, as if checking for someone else. I thought I'd be the first to say hi. "You're in 70C, right?" Her voice was light, but something in her jaw was clenched. Tight. I nodded slowly and stepped aside to let her in. She hesitated for just a second, then crossed the threshold like someone walking into a dream they'd had too many times. She placed the tin on the counter and looked around. "Still looks the same," she murmured. "Nothing ever really changes here." I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, touched the glass with the tips of her fingers. "Do you remember me?" she asked. The question hit like a punch. Because I did, but not from this version of reality. From the one before. The spiral stairwell. The hall of mirrors. The crawl space. Clara had called me. She'd warned me. She'd known everything, and now here she was again, same eyes, same voice, but slightly off like an echo or a faded photo. "I remember," I said. I never stopped. She turned, her face crumpling just slightly. "Then maybe there's still time." She handed me a small envelope from her pocket. It was yellowed with age, sealed with red wax. My name was written across the front. Not Jonathan, not any of the names I'd used to flee my past, but my real name. The one I hadn't spoken aloud since Rachel. I tore it open. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was me and Rachel, standing in front of the apartment door, both of us smiling, her head on my shoulder, my hand holding hers. The date on the bottom corner was May 13th, 10 years ago. The day I first moved into 7C before everything. On the back, a note in her handwriting. Try again. I didn't understand. Try what again? Our relationship, my life. Undo what had been done. Clara watched me, silent, waiting. I looked back at the photo. My face in it wasn't scared. It wasn't burdened. It was light. Free. That version of me didn't know it would happen, but didn't know Rachel did. And she'd written this for a reason. What happens if I try? I asked. Clara shrugged. Either you end it, or you become it. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I wandered the apartment, touching things, opening drawers, searching for clues. I found no crawl space, no locket, no diary, just Rachel's perfume lingering in the bedroom closet, like she'd left just before I arrived. At 3:33 a.m., I sat in the living room, holding the photo, watching the mirror across from me. I waited. The second ticked. The air grew colder, and then, just as before, the lights flickered. She stepped into view. Rachel. But not the fractured version. Not the dream. This was Rachel as she had been. Alive. Whole. She walked to the couch, sat across from me. Her eyes locked on mine. You brought me back, she said, voice barely audible. You remembered. That matters. I asked her what I was supposed to do. She smiled softly. Tell the truth. The words made me recoil. Because truth was never simple. It wasn't just about confessing to the violence. It was about digging into the rot beneath it. The control, the resentment, the way I had made her small so I could feel big. The truth wasn't that hurt her. The truth was that I'd erased her. And now she refused to stay gone. I'm sorry, I whispered. She stood, came closer, and touched my chest. No, she said. Be better. And then she was gone. But something remained, a weight in my hands. The locket, it burned hot against my skin as I held it. The photo inside had changed again. Now it showed Rachel sitting at the writing desk, surrounded by notes, tapes, photographs. Her documenting everything, archiving every version of me. The truth wasn't a weapon. It was a record, a warning. I understood then that I wasn't meant to live in this apartment. I was meant to witness it, to tell it, to stop the next man from becoming me. I began writing that night, filling notebooks with every memory, every dream, every version of the truth I had denied. I wrote about Rachel, not as a victim or ghost, but as a person. Brilliant. Kind, angry, full of life. I didn't spare myself. I wrote about the silences, the gaslighting, the way I chipped away at her voice until only mine remained. I wrote until my hands cramped and my eyes blurred. And when I stopped, the locket was gone. In its place was a key. Old, rusted, with a tag 70C attic storage. I had never noticed an attic. I climbed the building's back stairwell and found a hatch above the 7th floor. Dust poured down as I pushed it open. Inside, the attic was vast and silent. Cobwebs drifted like curtains, but in the far corner sat a box, wooden, heavy. I unlocked it with the key. Inside were dozens of tapes, cassette, VHS, reel-to-reel, each labeled with a date and a name. Each one a recording. Rachel's voice filled the attic as I played the first. I am not gone, she said. I am not just what he made me. I exist, and someone will remember. The rest of the night I listened, and in the morning I packed my things. Not to flee, but to publish. Rachel's story would be told. Not just the horror of what happened, but the truth of who she was. Because only by telling it could I break the cycle. Only by telling it could I make sure 7C never swallowed another name. I left 70C with nothing but a duffel bag of notebooks and a portable recorder filled with my own confessions. The tapes from the attic, Rachel's voice, the layers of her memory. Those I stored in a fireproof lockbox and carried on me like sacred relics. I didn't look back as I descended the stairwell that last morning. I didn't pause at the cracked mirror on the landing, didn't glance at the door to 7D, where Clara had watched my descent into revelation like a reluctant guardian. I just walked, steady and deliberate, past the lobby's flickering lights and into the gray morning air. The city looked the same, but nothing was. I didn't go to the police. What would I even say? Hello, I'm a man who may or may not have existed under several names, who may or may not have killed a woman who is now a ghost that keeps me trapped in recursive timelines of guilt and forgetting. Oh, and by the way, I found an attic full of cassette tapes documenting the emotional collapse of a woman whose death no one remembers. No, this truth didn't belong in a police report. It belonged in daylight, in public. where it couldn't be buried again. I started a website anonymously. It was simple. Black text on a white screen, no images, no ads. Just the name, what she hid in 70C. I uploaded everything. My journals, the photos I had drawn without realizing. And the audio, Rachel's voice. One recording per day, every word she'd ever spoken to a tape deck in the dark corners of that cursed apartment. I watched the visitor count climb slowly. Dozens, then hundreds. Comments rolled in. Most called it fiction. Some said ARG, some were angry, some terrified. But a few knew. They wrote things like, "This happened to me in 4B," or "I lived in that building in 97. I thought I was going insane." They remembered. Or they were remembering. And that was enough. I began receiving emails, survivors, witnesses, people who had forgotten until the words dragged it out of them. One woman sent me a photo of a closet door with the name R. Owens, scratched into it 30 times. Another man told me about his brother, who had vanished after renting a unit on the 7th floor, and when they cleaned the apartment, they found sketches behind the drywall. Sketches of the same girl I had drawn. Rachel. Wide, mouth soon shut, hands pressed to glass. But the one message that stopped my breath came from a woman in Montreal. She attached a photo I hadn't seen before. It was Rachel. Older, smiling with a man at what looked like a train station. The man was me. But I didn't remember this moment. I didn't remember ever leaving the city with her. And at the bottom of the photo was a date from 5 years in the future. I stared at that image for hours. The file's metadata confirmed the timestamp, its authenticity. But the memory didn't exist in my mind, which meant one of two things: either Rachel had rewritten a piece of the timeline, or I was seeing a possible future, one in which I had saved her, not with apologies, not with grief, but with memory. With truth, I flew to Montreal, not to find the woman, not yet, but to follow the pull. The thread Rachel had left knotted through space and time. I stayed in a hostel and walked the streets for days. No purpose, just instinct. And then one night, outside a bookstore with a cracked front window, I heard her voice, clear as morning. Try again. I turned. No one. But on the brick wall beside me, someone had drawn her. In chalk. A perfect rendering of Rachel's face. Benefit. A sentence in French LC Soviet. Fates, Liossi. She remembers, so do it too. That night I had a dream, not of horror, of a station. Trains hissing. Rachel at the platform, looking at a departure board. She was alive, smiling. She didn't look at me. But she didn't need to. I woke with tears drying on my face and a sense of urgency thundering in my chest. I contacted Clara. It wasn't easy. The email I had for her bounced. The building's landline rang forever. But then, one night, I received a call from a number with no ID. I answered. Silence. Then, "She's proud of you." My breath caught. "Is this?" "She wants you to finish it," Clara said softly. "The building still lives, but it listens now." I asked her if she was still in 70D. She laughed. "I moved out years ago, but sometimes I still wake up at 3033 and hear her humming." We stayed silent for a while. Then she said, "It's spreading." I knew she didn't mean the ghost, not in the horror sense, not like some malevolent spirit infecting the world. She meant the memory, the reckoning. What had begun in 70C was unfolding outward like ripples in water. More people were remembering, more were telling, and that was all Rachel had ever wanted. Not revenge, recognition. I returned to the city. The building still stood. The landlord was different. Or maybe he wasn't. Hard to tell. 70C was listed again, vacant with a fresh coat of paint and a suspicious lack of history. I rented it for one final week. One last stay. I brought no clothes. Just a recorder, a notebook, and a single framed photo of Rachel. Taken from the website. I placed it in the hallway, right where the mirror used to be. I slept on the floor. Each night, I left the recorder running. On the 5th night, I heard her. Soft footsteps, a sigh, and a whisper, "Thank you." No more haunting. No more loops. Just the sound of someone finally leaving. When I checked the tape in the morning, the voice wasn't there. But that's okay. It wasn't for the tape. It was for me. I left the apartment that final day and didn't lock the door. I posted one last update on the site. The room is quiet now, but listen anyway. Tell her story, so she doesn't have to whisper forever. But then I deleted the site. Every file. Every log. Every backup. Because it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to those who had heard it. To those who would carry it forward. A month later, I passed by a subway wall in a different city, and someone had painted 7 large letters, Remember. No punctuation. No explanation. But I knew. She had been seen, and now she could rest. As for me, sometimes I still wake up at 3:33 am, sometimes I still see her in the corner of a shop window, reflected just behind my shoulder. But she doesn't stare. She watches, quietly, gratefully. And sometimes, when I'm lucky, she smiles, not as a ghost, but as a girl who was once forgotten and is now forever remembered. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.